Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this weekend's virtual Sunday service. We who have that time. We are going to start in song today. So we just had our beautiful prelude by Carl. And now it is time, and thank you, Colin, for ringing the chimes. It is time for hymn number 61. Lo, the earth awakes again. Now this week we will be singing in our own homes. We don't have a voice accompaniment, so everybody listen to Carl play and sing along on your own in your homes. And we can't wait to hear your voices all together again.
Good morning. My name is Nancy Hirschadter. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. My name is Nancy Hirschadter, and I'm a member of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Danbury, where I've been a member for about 10 years. Welcome to this virtual service of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Danbury. We're so glad that each of you are able to join us this morning, and together, in community, we can ensure that social distancing does not mean social disengagement. Our weekly services are more than just a gathering of our physical bodies. It's the forming of a sacred time that we make together. Whether you are well-versed in the technology of teleconferencing, I'm not, or this is your first venture, say together, we welcome you. Whatever the faith and traditions of your past, whatever your theological stance, whatever your heritage, whoever you are and whomever you love, we welcome you. You can learn more about us on our website and Facebook page. We encourage you to share our Facebook page and reach out to others who may be isolated at this time and might benefit from the spiritual connection that's typically available by walking through our open doors on Sunday morning. Again, welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Danbury, where we welcome all in a spirit of compassion, inquiry, and service. Today we welcome the Reverend Mark Cutolo, LCSW, as our guest speaker. Reverend Cutolo serves the Fourth Universalist Society in the city of New York as an affiliate community minister, a born and raised resident of the state of New York, and a millennial. He has both a Master of Divinity and a Master of Social Work. Besides serving at Fourth Universalist Society, he works full-time as a psychotherapist at a local college counseling and wellness center, helping students to achieve improved mental well-being. Mark is passionate about liberal religion, especially the historic Universalist theology, in which the eternal who is greater than all yet present in each is so generous that in the end we are all loved and saved. Mark also currently serves our faith on the Board of Trustees of the New York State Convention of Universalists. Today, Religious Education Children and Youth is experimenting with some new meeting times. Families with children in preschool through 5th grade will gather after the service at 11:30 a.m. Youth in 6th through 8th grade, as well as 9th through 12th grade, will each meet in separate groups at 5 p.m. If you have kids in these groups but have not received the Zoom links, please contact Sierra Marie at dre@uudanbury.org.
Thank you, Nancy. And one last time here, I know some people are new each week, so we just go over our virtual guidelines that you are all muted, and your webcams, you have the power to control. So at the top of your webcam view, if you have your camera up and you hover over it, there should be a bunch of little squares that could be gallery view and you can see lots of people, or it can be on speaker view. At times there'll be text on screen. At other times we will just have faces on screen, and you can control that. We will have Reverend Mark pinned to the screen during the sermon today for the purpose of our recording. And if you need anything at all, Sherry is available, and please chat with her privately, and we will be using chat throughout the service as we have the last several weeks. So please hold any feedback on our process or the service itself, and please send us an email after. We'd like to reserve the chat for the service today. So Nancy already introduced Reverend Mark. We are so excited to have him today. And Reverend, I'm going to unmute you, and we look forward to hearing your opening words. Reverend Mark?
Sorry, I was just waiting for the screen to change.
Oh, there you go. I'm sorry.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you today, even online. And our opening words come from the second chapter of the Song of Solomon. For now, the winter is past. The rain is over and gone. The flowers appear on the earth. The time of singing has come. The fig tree puts forth its figs, and the vines are in blossom. They give forth fragrance. And now, as people and congregations all across the country will do, we will now light our flaming chalice. If you happen to have a flaming chalice or a candle nearby, I invite you to get that, and we will light it together, after which we'll say our chalice lighting affirmation. Love is the spirit of this congregation, and justice is its light. This is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek and speak the truth in love, to help one another and celebrate life.
Oh, we are. Oh. Okay, and good morning. I'm Allie Hafner, and this is Lily Hafner.
Hi.
And we're going to do the children's affirmation. So if all of our young people could come up front and get your yous ready. Actually, everybody get your yous ready. especially the young people.
We
We are
Unitarian
Universalists. We are people with open minds, loving hearts, and helping hands. Okay, and good morning again. For our Time for All Ages, Lily's going to read us a story, and I just wanted to introduce that story by saying that it's a story about what the Jewish holiday of Passover celebrates. So the story is about courage and bravery during the very first Passover. Now, Jewish people around the world celebrate Passover every year. And so when you hear the story, you'll see why. And share a special meal called a Seder. Now, our family will celebrate Seders on Wednesday and Thursday this week using Zoom to connect with our relatives all around the country. UUCD had planned a Seder for April 10th, which of course had to be canceled, but we look forward to celebrating with you next year in Danbury.
Okay.
Lily?
Should I read first?
Nope.
Okay.
Just jump
In
right
the
in.
days when the Pharaoh
Oh,
ruled
you're right. That's our page. Okay, sorry.
and the pyramids cast their shadows over Egypt, there lived an Israelite slave named Nachshon. Nachshon's parents, grandparents, and even his great-great-grandparents had lived as slaves. But Nachshon knew that long ago his family had been free, and he dreamed of freedom every night. From dawn to dusk, under the midday rays of the desert sun, Nachshon's father and brothers labored in the quarries, mixing straw and mud into bricks. Nachshon slipped past the taskmakers and smuggled in cool drinking water for them. Neither the Egyptian taskmakers nor Pharaoh himself scared the young boy. His family began calling him Brave Nachshon. When Pharaoh and his royal courtiers arrived in the city market, most slaves fled in fear. Not Nachshon. He trailed behind and spied on them. Whatever Nachshon learned, he reported to the Israelite elders. Soon everyone began calling him Brave Nachshon. Nachshon, though, had one fear. In the evening, most slaves took a cool swim in the river Nile. But Nachshon was afraid to swim.
Oh, and you can say on the next page.
On the next page, when Nachshon grew old enough, he had to join his fathers and brothers working as slaves. They dreamed of freedom as years passed. Okay.
Yeah, just read it.
Okay. Just as Nachshon began to give up hope, he heard about a stranger promising freedom for the Israelites. His name was Moses. On the next page, Moses told the Israelites, "You must have faith that freedom is possible. Real freedom means trusting God and believing in yourself." That evening, his friends were celebrating the possibility of freedom. They asked Nachshon if he was still afraid to swim. Moses saw Nachshon by the water and whispered to him, "Real freedom means facing your fears and overcoming them." Nachshon used all of his courage to just dangle his legs into the water. The next morning, Moses approached Pharaoh and demanded freedom for the Israelites. Pharaoh's heart was hard. He not only rejected the plea, but he made the Israelites work harder. But Moses told the people not to give up hope. God will send plagues over Egypt to soften Pharaoh's heart, he predicted. When God sent locusts, Nachshon picked each and every insect off the few vegetables in his family's small garden. The plagues did not frighten Nachshon. When God sent frogs, Nachshon caught a pair in a basket and let his nephews and nieces play with them. When God made the land pitch black, with light only in Israelite homes, Nachshon ventured outside to check on his neighbors. Finally, the Pharaoh gave in. He told Moses to take the Israelites and leave. Nachshon and his family packed quickly, without time to even let their bread rise. The Israelites headed to the Sea of Reeds and camped out on its shores. The Israelites heard a strange noise in the distance. The Egyptians were coming after them. Nachshon remembered Moses' words about trusting God, believing in himself, and overcoming fears. On the next page, Nachshon stepped slowly into the sea. The water rose from his toes to his ankles, to his knees, to his waist, to his shoulders, to his chin, to his lips. Nachshon repeated silently, "Face your fears, have faith." Just as the water was about to cover his head, a miracle occurred. Moses lifted his staff to the heavens, and a strong east wind pulled back the water, creating a dry path through the sea. All the Israelites joined Nachshon and walked with him to freedom. When they reached the opposite shore, the Israelites broke into song. But Nachshon simply waded in the sea and let the cool waters remind him that he was free. Free from slavery and free from his fears. Now we are going to sing "This Little Light of Mine" with special lyrics that you will see on the screen.
That sounded great. I know we can't hear each other, but I know it sounds fantastic. This is the point in our service, which has become very special, I think, to a lot of us from what we're hearing, and that's our virtual silent milestones. And what we're going to ask everybody to do at this time, I know everybody's kind of created different traditions in your homes, if you have a bowl with stones or a new candle to light. But please feel free to use the chat window and chat in your joy, your concern, or your milestone as we listen to Carl play another beautiful piece.
Good morning, everyone. Now is the time in our service for our offering. We are finding that passing the virtual plate is not like passing the actual plate. And although that we are meeting virtually, our building and our staff are not virtual, they are actual. So our monthly debts remain the same. We will graciously receive the offering, looking forward to meeting together in our fellowship hall when we get together on the other side of these challenging times. If you're sending your offering by check, please in the subject line put offering. And you can also use the Simple Give account, which will help sustain us through this time. Thank you as always for your generosity and support. And now if you will join me as we offer the congregational response. In the spirit of compassion and service, we dedicate these, our offerings. And as we prepare to give, let's enjoy the gift of Carl's beautiful music this morning.
Our reading today is a responsive reading, and it comes from the Beth El congregation in Sudbury, Massachusetts. I'm going to read through the entire reading, but I invite you, even though you are on mute, to read the portions in italics. Hear now this reading. What sacrifices would we make for freedom today? What would we leave? How far would we go? How deeply would we look within ourselves? Our ancestors had no time to await the rising of the bread. Yet we, who have that time, what do we do to be worthy of our precious inheritance? We were slaves in Egypt, but now we are free. How easy it is for us to relive the days of our bondage as we sit in the warmth and comfort of our Savior. How much harder to relieve the pain of those who live in the bitterness of slavery today. Here ends the reading. To outsiders, as much as to ourselves, Unitarian Universalists are seen as being a skeptical group, a people who are so free-thinking, so individualistic, so doubtful that it's amazing the IRS even recognizes us as a religious group. And while that stereotype isn't completely groundless, I also see it a bit differently. I have never joined your congregation for Sunday morning worship before. I have to say how impressed I am, not just by your congregation, but by congregations across the country, which despite the challenges we now face, continue to meet together week by week, Heeding the warnings by scientists, public health officials, and local leaders, we have stopped meeting in person in our church buildings, but the warmth of community continues remotely in these online gatherings. I take this as a sign, not of our skepticism, but of profound faithfulness. We are a people full of faith. There is no rule which says we must continue to maintain our regular Sunday morning practice, and none of us meet here because of the negative consequences if we don't. We meet at this time and in this way because we are a religious community who is faithful to the spirit of community, to a higher sense of values, to a way of being in the world, to one another, and to a vision of a better world. So for that, I wish to express my gratitude. I am grateful for this religious congregation for inviting me to be part of your Sunday morning and for continuing to show to the wider community that you are tenacious and faithful, even under challenging circumstances. A few months ago, in December, I had the honor to preach at a UU congregation on the subject of World AIDS Day, which happened to fall on a Sunday. I chose to highlight that topic because I myself have a background in providing services and psychological support to people living with or at risk for HIV. I shared with them how World AIDS Day is one of 8 official observances promoted by the World Health Organization. And I acknowledge that it might seem a bit strange to choose a public health theme for Sunday morning worship. I explained, though, that as human beings who are mortal, there are a seemingly infinite number of ways in which our bodies can get injured or infected or fail us. And whatever conditions we or our loved ones may be affected by, that I thought it's valuable for spiritual communities like ours to take time to acknowledge issues of health and wellness generally, as well as the specific ways disease and mortality can affect our bodies and psyches. Little did I know just a few months later, our country would be affected in an unimaginable way by infectious disease. It highlights for me not only how issues of health and wellness are perennial issues for our congregations, but also how what is old is new and what is new is old, and that in a very real way, the wise words attributed to the sage King Solomon in the Hebrew Bible are true. Quote, "What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. There is nothing new under the sun," end quote. Whether it's COVID-19 or HIV or Ebola or measles or malaria or tuberculosis or polio, the history of humanity is marked by the heroic task of ensuring the well-being of our species against the infectious agents which would diminish or shorten our lives. As a society, we are doing what we can with simple, low-tech interventions like social distancing and through high-tech interventions like advancing scientific research for a vaccine or a cure. Until those interventions result in their desired outcome, we will continue to be a faithful people who heed the insights of science and who also express hope for a future when the problems we're experiencing today will no longer be a problem. Of course, in the midst of this pandemic, we are also in the time of the calendar when many festivals are approaching. For those who follow Judaism, Passover will start on the evening of April 8th. For those who follow Christianity, today is Palm Sunday, and next week is Easter Sunday. For all people, this is the start of the spring, when in the Northern Hemisphere we welcome rising temperatures, budding trees, blossoming flowers, and the sight of robins and other animals who are born in the spring, like swans, deer, and herons. It's been incredible to me to notice the ways in which nature seems immune to the pandemic we're living in. Even though viruses are a part of nature, if one takes a solitary walk through the park or forest, or simply observes the trees, water, grass, birds, and sky, one could easily forget the news headlines, the panic, the distress, the disruptions, and the anxious mood many people feel when we're confronted with the gravity of these times. The timelessness of the changing of the seasons is reassuring in its own way. But not only the changing of the seasons, the religious spring festivals too have a timelessness to them, and the narrative and symbolism within those ancient stories have a fascinating way of speaking to people across generations. The story of Passover is certainly an example. Of course, one of the main themes in that story is one of liberation from tyranny and slavery to freedom and the possibility of new opportunities. As our country itself practiced legal slavery for generations, the Passover story has held a special meaning to generations of African Americans who recognize themselves in this story with its message of deliverance from bondage and a future which can surpass the past. Early American settlers who came here from Europe, who fled religious or political persecution in the Old World, also identified with the story of the Exodus and Passover. For some later immigrant groups too, crossing the Atlantic or Pacific Oceans by boat or plane to get to our country was like crossing the Red Sea, and this land is to them a kind of promised land that they had only dreamed of. For us today, who are living in a time marked by the grim realities of COVID-19, the Passover story has value as we interpret this ancient story. One of the key elements of the Passover story is the story of the 10 plagues of Egypt. As told in the book of Exodus, the God of Israel inflicts 10 plagues on Egypt in order to force a reluctant Pharaoh to allow the Israelites to escape from slavery in Egypt. These 10 disasters would serve signs and marvels by God in response to the Pharaoh's derision towards the God of Israel, with God saying in the story that, quote, "The Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord," end quote. The 10 plagues in order are these. First, the water of the river Nile was turned into blood, resulting in a bad odor, the fish dying, and the water not being drinkable. The second plague was of a multitude of frogs who invaded the palaces, people's homes, people's ovens, and even jumping up on people. The third plague was of an infestation of gnats, which turned the dust into a horde of the annoying flying insects. The fourth plague was of a swarm of flies. The fifth plague was of a lethal pestilence against the livestock of the Egyptians. The sixth plague was dermatological, that of festering boils on both humans and their livestock. The seventh plague was a thunderstorm of severe hail, as had never been seen before. The eighth plague was of locusts, which swarmed over the country and destroyed whatever vegetation had survived the hailstorm. The ninth plague was of darkness, which covered the land for 3 continuous days. The 10th plague was one of fatality. The firstborn son of every Egyptian family, from the Pharaoh to the most humble servant, was killed, as was the firstborn of the cattle. The Israelites, however, were saved from the 10th plague, as they had been instructed to paint the tops of their doors with lamb blood, so that God would pass over their homes. The Pharaoh had been obstinate after each plague, but by the last one, he finally relented. and told Moses to take the Israelites out of Egypt as soon as possible. I mention these details of the Passover story today because in a real sense, we are living through a plague. The World Health Organization and the Centers for Disease Control don't call it that, but the dictionary definition of plague is, quote, a contagious disease that spreads rapidly and kills many people. So, by that definition, the novel coronavirus can be considered a plague. Thanks to the advances of modern medicine, the general population in our country hasn't experienced a medical crisis of this kind in a very long time. As human beings, one of the ways that we deal with this or any other crisis is to make meaning of the situation, to tell stories, find an interpretation, or otherwise to somehow make sense of what's happening around us. The story of the Israelites' exodus from slavery in Egypt to freedom in the Promised Land is generally thought by scholars and archaeologists to have some ultimate historicity to it, but that the biblical text itself has little historical worth. Nevertheless, the story has worth as a founding myth of the Jewish people in terms of explaining their culture, institutions, and origins, and has been considered by many to be the greatest story ever told. For us, we who have that time in our quarantine and social distancing, we too may want to explain what happened through making meaning and interpretation. I myself have heard many such explanations and interpretations from family, friends, and social media. I've heard it said that the coronavirus was sent by God, who was worried that World War III was going to erupt between the Chinese, the Iranians, and the Americans, and the virus was meant to distract us. I've also heard it said that God is using the virus to wake us up to the need to repent from our sinful ways now that we have so few external distractions. I've heard it said that the coronavirus was sent by Mother Nature as punishment against humans for the ways in which we have desecrated and polluted the earth. You won't be surprised to know that I don't find any of those explanations satisfying or plausible, and in fact, find them to be highly insensitive. Those who are affected by this pandemic, to say nothing of their credibility. What I find interesting is, if we go back to the biblical story of the Passover, even there, we see that within the tradition that arose from that mythic story, that there is an awareness of the ways that how we interpret events or stories and what those stories say about us or about God can be problematic. After the Israelites flee Egypt and miraculously cross the Red Sea, which had opened for them, they are chased by the Egyptian army, which Pharaoh had sent after changing his mind. As those charioteers crossed the Red Sea, the water came down on top of them, killing them all. The Israelites were now safe to continue their journey to the Promised Land and sang a song of praise to God for their delivery. Having said that, an ancient Jewish commentary on the scripture notes that God silenced the angels in heaven from joining Israelites in that song of praise. God asked the heavenly hosts, "How can you sing my praises while my creatures are drowning?" Disaster and miracle are both in the eye of the beholder. God cried for the Egyptians, and we learn from that to view the full reality of every situation in all its complexity, not just how we personally benefit. Friends, at the end of the day, we share a world with viruses, bacteria, and parasites. And though I wish it were different, I recognize that there are times in history when the imbalance between us and infectious agents is overwhelming. I also recognize the tenacity of the human race and the altruism, compassion, care, empathy, research, and treatment that we provide to one another when situations are too much to handle. In this holy season of spring festivals, may we continue to be those people who are careful about the stories we tell, that our narratives may always lean towards encouraging us towards our highest values of compassion and benevolence. That concludes my sermon for today. Let's take a moment now to center ourselves, to quiet our hearts and minds as we prepare for our spoken meditation, which I will begin with in just a moment. At this time, while you are sitting down wherever you are, be aware of your feet grounded on the floor. If you wish, I invite you to close your eyes. Take a deep breath in, scanning your entire body up and down, from your toes to the top of your head. Then back down again while breathing out. As you inhale and exhale, breathe deep into your chest so your belly fills with the air. When exhaling, control the air as it leaves your lungs. Make breathing in and out your only responsibility. Listen to your breath as it goes in and out of your nose. Feel it as it fills your lungs. Control it as your lungs empty. Do this for 1 minute. At the end of that portion of the meditation, I will continue with the text of today's spoken meditation. The words of our meditation today are by Wendell Berry. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water. And I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. Here ends our meditation. At this time, we now extinguish our flaming chalices. I'm going to extinguish my chalice, after which we will say the words together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and out into the world until we are together again.
Join us in singing hymn 413 as Carl plays, and we'd love to hear your beautiful voices from afar.
The Spirit.
Our closing words today are words by the Unitarian Universalist minister, the Reverend Dr. Wayne B. Arneson. Take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth. You are not alone.
Thank you, Reverend Mark. And Carl will play our postlude, and please stay on for our virtual coffee hour and take some time to chat with one another through the chat window privately.